Welcome to Cancer and Peace, everyone. I'm Sean Stewart. I'm here with my good buddy, Peter Scalzo. I'm going to facilitate a conversation. He's our host, and we're going to kick off another conversation on how to find peace in the cancer journey. And a key question that I think every cancer patient goes through, we were kind of just debating, does everyone go through this? Maybe they've already settled this, but there's an existential question that comes for someone who gets a diagnosis of cancer, because it really speaks to that question of, am I going to live? And if I'm going to live, then the very next question, or if there's a question about living and dying, is there a God, and where is God in this? And so I'm going to kick it back to my good buddy Pete and say, hey, did you have this question, and where did this come from, and where did you find inside of yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for that. I have always maintained that spirituality is really a major part of the cancer journey, that because it's such a benefit to have a spiritual program. And so I'm thinking about my own life, and I really had a foundation of faith when I was diagnosed with cancer, because at age 10, that's when I really surrendered my life and will and had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, which started my journey in Orthodox Christianity, and really maintained that journey throughout my life. I mean, I went to church a lot, and
I'm getting ready to challenge you here. So
besides going to church, I went to faith-based learning institutions, and when we had children, we raised them up in the Orthodox faith, Orthodox Christianity, and whether that was evangelical or whatever. And so when I was diagnosed with cancer at 43 years of age, I already had a strong belief that there was a God and that I had a relationship with that God.
Now, can I dive in just a little bit here? Because
sure.
I think my experience, it might be similar, or I might define it differently, but I grew up in the church and had some similar experiences as you walking through. And I would have said to you that I had a belief or a relationship with God, but I think my belief right now is that I had a process of religion.
Okay.
And I'm kind of wondering if the cancer journey doesn't move it for a lot of people, because that's what my experience has been in the recovery journey, is moving from a process of religion into a deep experiential relationship with God, like a meeting God in a real way. And that cancer is like one of those things, that those dark night of the soul experiences in life that drive you to a greater question. And it's more like, is God real? Because I think that's what the question really is, as opposed to, am I just doing religion? And because it can be scary when you start thinking about, and we've talked about narrative before here, the number of people that are just walking along with a narrative about God or a narrative about religion and about faith. And I think where I'm actually wanting to hear where you go with a little bit is, did God become more real, less real? Where did you find him? And or did you find some level of process religion in your life? What did you find inside yourself? I'm kind of interested in that, because I don't think there's a lot of peace in process.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, and it kind of cracks me up, the saying, there's no atheists in foxholes.
Yes.
And kind of getting at that. And I remember as a young boy dwelling on the existence of God and having a sense of peace, inner peace with that, knowing that there was something there, like real. And that was even before my religious experience or anything like that. And I think for me, definitely in my spiritual journey growing up in the church, there was certainly process and religion and things like that. But I can honestly say there were also many experiences of supernatural, like joy and a presence and a peace, that I can only explain that was God in my life. That was Jesus in my life. So it was enough that I was willing to and chose to go to a faith-based college, a faith-based law school, and to make a stand on a community level of my faith and relationship with Jesus Christ. So there was enough there, and it was real to me. I mean, I had lots of times of surrendering and giving my life to the Lord, and raising our kids in the faith, was that all that was real to me. But if you're talking about what did the cancer journey do to that relationship, that's a sea change. Yeah, that's a whole movement of God in me, which was much deeper than what I had experienced before that. More of an emptying of myself and a being filled with the presence of God. It was really, I'll put some meat to the bones here. It was when I was diagnosed with cancer and going through the cancer journey, there was a sense, especially when it became metastatic, that I was going to pass from this journey and from this cancer journey, and that there was, and this, I believe the scriptures talk about it, but there was this sense that my experience on earth was temporary and transient, and that what really mattered was the eternal and my relationship with the Lord. And so I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it starts quite a bit in the sense of, 'cause I think I'll put a different set of words on it. Isn't the question at some point, what are you going to really trust? And so we're given a certain level of trust test. And then when life is easy, the number of people that you see say, hey, I believe this, or I support that, or I will give my life for this, but you don't really know what you believe until you get to the point of the fire. And cancer is certainly the fire for most people, at least if it's a serious diagnosis. Definitely stage 4 type cancers cause you to really have to answer that question of, I think, what do you really trust? And that trust has to be put into action. You can't just say it. There's some action that you have to put behind it, I think.
Yeah, I think most cancer diagnoses have a sense of stripping off like what you think is important in life and what you place value in. And it's sort of, there's a shedding of like, okay, well, material possessions, they just don't do it anymore. And excuse me, that promotion in my job isn't as important as I thought it was. And all of a sudden, wow, those key relationships in my life, they're really important. And then I think you're right. I think the question of, and this is why I love working in the cancer space, but what happens after death? What happens to my mortality with this cancer journey? Should it go that way? But there's definitely a sense of I'm not in control. I think that's for me, that was the overwhelming sense was, I thought I was in control somewhat of my law practice and my family and all that. Turns out when I got into recovery, I really wasn't in control of very much except my own responses. But certainly cancer, especially metastatic cancer, was a complete stripping away of any control that I thought that I had, and getting down to I was in the hospital in my gown with this really bad diagnosis and prognosis, and it was just me and, okay, God, this is my time with you. What does all this mean?
So describe that. Where was God?
Yeah. So I had, as I've said before, I had that period of time of crisis and depression and anger, sadness.
So did God leave you in that time?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I know in my heart of hearts and scripturally that God never left me, but it felt like that. My emotional life was in a tailspin. And so I needed to process those emotions and then not let them rule the day, but return back to what I knew to be true. But in the process, God had filled me with his spirit is the only way I can put it. And so it was me naked with this gown with tubes, with this body failing, me and him. That's all. Everything else was stripped away. And that's when I really had a revelation of his presence and power in my life in the deepest way possible. Excuse me.
You're describing a revelation, and it sounds like something you felt or you sensed. And so maybe you put a word on it. I think I have a word in my head, but I'm curious what word you would put on it.
What word were you going to say?
Well, you're doing a cancer and peace that you felt peace.
Oh, right.
That's the word I think you would be putting on there, but maybe I'm not
no,
trying to.
And I think it was mind, emotions, will, spiritual, physical, everything melted into one, and a complete peace throughout my being, that even though your situation is bleak and bad and disastrous, I'm giving you comfort, joy, and peace. And that's exactly what I felt. It was kind of like a blanket.
So you're not bringing physical evidence of God to this conversation. No. You're saying it's something that as you are stripped, you're going to make a decision in your heart. Who do you trust? What do you trust? And you'll either experience God's peace in your life and find that it's real, or I guess you won't. But I think you're saying your experiences, that's exactly what you found in that moment. You couldn't go out and scientifically prove God, so to speak. That wasn't your journey, but you can't be disproven from your heart now. And that's because of these experiences.
Right.
And so if you were advising somebody who's in a cancer journey and they're hitting that existential crisis, and they're walking along and they're thinking about they're being stripped right now. They're being stripped of control, their ability to control their circumstances, and they're having to decide what's important. How do they pursue that journey that you're talking about of where is God? What's the steps you would think they would go on?
That's why I love the cancer space, right from what you just said right there, because there's a choice to be made. And I love it because it's the most basic, stripped of everything around us choice to make. It's like, okay, here I am as a human being, and it's the prospect of suffering and pain and death, but I'm totally not in control. And so where am I going to go with that choice? And I think, and each person has to decide in their own heart and mind, where they're going to find that peace. For me, it was letting go, surrendering, actually giving myself over to my higher power, Jesus Christ. And it was a supernatural, and I'll use the word transaction or interaction, but it was a supernatural interaction.
When you think about the choice, I was thinking when you have an existential crisis, you start thinking about what's important, a way of going back and looking at this would be, what would you put on your headstone? And certainly it wouldn't be anything about, I made VP or CEO of an organization, or I've walked through a lot of cemeteries. I'm yet to see that. He was a CEO that everybody loved, or, what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah,
best attorney ever. You don't see those on the headstones. It's almost always relational. Beloved father, loved mother, a child, that, just a description of an adjective in front of a relational person. And so what I think you're saying in this conversation is that, and where does that start? What's the greatest relationship that you could have is the starting point of this conversation is with God, is what you're saying. And you found that, though, the deepest part of that is when you learn to trust God.
Mm.
And so on your tombstone, you might say, beloved child of God. And that wouldn't seem weird or odd because it would be saying you found the best.
So there is something that I would want
Let's
to
hear it.
put on, and it was, he walked with God.
Relational. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you thought of that when?
I've been thinking a lot about that because there's a biblical character, and that's how he's described. It's the only thing said about him, really. And it says he walked with God. And I thought, how beautiful is that? It's not about performing or, any accolades that we would expect, except for this intimacy that he shared with his maker, his creator.
Something we've talked about quite a bit. I mean, you go on walks all the time. I know you and I talk on the phone every now and then. You're out on your walk, and most of the time when I catch up with you, you describe that you're interacting with God on your walk.
Right.
And for those who don't experience that type of relationship, there might be worth talking about that a little bit. I want to at least posit some concepts out there. And it's something that you and I have talked about. You said it a second ago was, when you were in your deepest trial, it wasn't that God had left you. You weren't abandoned, even though you felt abandoned, but he was there. And I think we talk a lot about the heart. And I hear this, you and I both follow Wild at Heart's ministry, and they talk a lot about the heart. And your heart really is like the core of who you are. What do you really believe? What's really important to you? And I think we've had this conversation on this program about you have to know yourself to know God. And to know yourself, you have to know your own heart. And I think the description that you're putting out there now is a description of how your heart is interacting with God's heart. It's not a physical interaction. It's the deepest part of you having a conversation with the deepest part of God. Is that a fair description? And how would you describe what happens in your connecting to that? Because our question up front is, where is God?
Right.
And it's as if many people are looking for God's awareness as a physical awareness. But the reality of God is not a physical awareness. It's something much deeper than that.
Yeah, and I have to go back to my 14th surgery of being destitute and gaining a connection with God that really I didn't think was possible. There were times in the hospital where I was completely quiet and silent, and yet I knew that God was present. There were times when I couldn't put words to how I felt, and yet I felt his presence. I knew he was there with me. I knew him as a rescuer, someone who, my God, who would come in and actually lift me out of the pit. It was a pit of despair. He lifted me out. In this cancer journey, I've known him as a deep physical healer. I've been healed miraculously, and really, that's what the doctors say. I've known him as an emotional healer, as a spiritual healer at the deepest levels. I don't want to paint myself out that I'm somehow this spiritual giant. I'm just a guy who really struggled deeply with a horrific physical journey and an emotional and intellectual stripping in every way. And yet grasping for truth and for comfort and peace, and God delivering, God being there, and God meeting me in my deepest needs, and to the point where now I just have discussions with the Lord like I would you right now.
Can I paint a picture? Because I think this is good. What you said, something, it could be that somebody might go, okay, you've been healed, in some really crazy environment. Maybe you're one of the great spiritual giants of our time. And I don't want to discount your spirituality. That's not my point. But I think the thing I would say is that the message that you're describing is that what you've experienced is available to everyone.
Mm.
Not necessarily miraculous healing. I'm not trying to say that everybody's
Right.
going to be miraculously healed, but the thing that you described a second ago that I really liked was the description of there were times when God was there and you didn't say anything at all.
Mm.
And I think about those that you're closest to. It's when you run out of words and you can sit there in silence and enjoy presence
Mm.
is where real depth of relationship is there, is that you can sense and feel and know love without having to say anything at all. It would be like sitting on a dock watching a sunset. I don't need you jabbering about the sunset to make me feel any better or worse. We can both experience the beauty and the moment in silence. Is a great place to be.
Mm.
There's times when there's great conversation that's to be had, but I think the point that I hear you making isn't that this is some special calling that only you got. This is available to everybody that's listening to this podcast, because that's why you're here, is that you want to share this opportunity, is that the cancer journey is an invitation to just that. It's to shed and be stripped of all of those things that are impediments to the simplicity of deep beauty of heart connection with God.
Mm.
And the place we find him is actually in our heart. It's not out in some physical space. It's not a physical meeting room. It's in our heart. And sometimes we have to get to a physical place of quietness or a physical place where there's not distractions. But I think the cancer journey is somewhat of a getting to a life distractions are all stripped away. And you're being asked the most important question. Is there a God, and where is he?
Mm.
Have you sensed him? Have you known him? Can you feel him?
Mm-hmm.
And you've described examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add to that description, take away from?
I mean, I would just say that if I'm asked the question, is God real? I have an overwhelming yes from my heart experience from him. Never mind other evidence that I see. And I know there's a lot of things about God that are mysterious. But I like to think of it as, you have children and I have children, and I've had 6 children, I have 6 children. And even when they were little or however old they were, I desired relationship with them. Like, I didn't want to just see them do sports or hear them do academics. I wanted to know their heart. What made them tick? Who are they? And I just think, and I'm a broken human, I'm a broken man. And I just think it's the desire of our Creator to know the heart of his creation, to know us like that. I know that's been my experience, that he delights in the times that I am completely intimate and naked with him, willing to share everything with him in complete honesty. And there's no condemnation from him. I have forgiveness of my sins. All I have to do is ask for that.
I think that child example is really good because you probably share something similar to that I have. Is
Excuse me.
even if I have one of my children are wayward, I don't love them any less. And certainly I want them to do things that are healthy in their lives, that they're not destroying themselves. But that deep sense of love never goes away. I think that's the way God is with us, is no matter how far we may feel like we've strayed inside, and we may feel like the prodigal son in the biblical story, that we're not even worthy of being in the family anymore. He's coming to put a ring on our finger and shoes on us, and to give us a big hug and to run out to us. That is where we find God. But it usually is also on the backside of the prodigal son story, where we've hit rock bottom. And when we've hit rock bottom, we set our hearts towards that which is most important.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? That many times our pathway to intimacy with God is through pain, through suffering, and I'll add through my brokenness, my seeing my defects and sins, and getting forgiveness and really just a wonderful healing from him in that arena also. And these have been pathways for me to have a deeper connection with the Lord.
So we're getting to a wrap-up point with this episode. Your belief is that God is real.
Yes.
You found him inside of yourself. But your deepest experience has been coming off of your deepest stripping, your deepest pain has brought you to that greatest revelation. And that's encouraging because that means even in this suffering, there's a deep gift from God in the midst of that. And with that gift brings great peace.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And dependence on him. It sounds like a weakness, but dependence on God is a beautiful, peaceful way to be.
And adventurous too.
Yeah.
It sounds like, no, actually, you're going to have great courage to lean into and trust
Boy, that's true.
the journey he's going to take you on. So it's not like just this dependent, weak, you hide. It is, no, you're going to have to stand in great courage to follow the path that he's put in front of you. And it will be amazing to see what he does in the midst of that with your life, purpose, joy. But for this podcast, peace. So we're going to call that a wrap for today.
Sean.
Thanks, Peter, for sharing your life with us. There's a lot more resources out on the website, cancerandpeace.com, and we hope to see you on future episodes. Thanks a bunch.
I know.